Hello, hello. Welcome to the Both Strokes Books Bookathon. Today we're going to have some great readings about focusing on the location and some of the great settings that our authors chosen. Today we have, should have asked for pronunciation, Alaina Erdell, Charlotte Greene, Kimberly Cooper Griffin, and Karis Walsh. Georgia Beers unfortunately has to send her regrets. She's kind of losing her voice, so she won't be able to join us today. So again, it's all about location, and we're going to start with Alaina Erdell. So a bit about Alaina. She released her debut novel, Fire, Water, and Rock with Both Strokes Books last month, and has her second book, there we go, has her second book due out in March. When not reading over 100 books a year, that's impressive. For writing, she enjoys cooking, traveling, oil painting, lovely, and being anywhere near the ocean. She made the move from San Francisco Bay to Ohio shortly before the pandemic. Good timing. So Alaina, if you can tell, Alaina, sorry, if you could tell us a little bit about the book you're going to read from and start reading whenever you're ready, and the rest of us will kind of go on mute.
Okay, Fire, Water, and Rock is the name of the book, and it's a contemporary romance. And it takes place in a state park in Washington. And Jess is a geologist. She's working on her thesis, and she is going to arrive at the state park for the summer. And Claire is a ranger, and she's worked there for almost a decade and has a special love for the park. But due to events in her life, she doesn't quite feel for it the same way that she had before. So they're at different points in their life. Jess is afraid of being alone. She lost her mother and her father, and being, going and doing this by herself is a big step for her. Jessica Sterling waited for an older Winnebago the color of a coffee stain to chug uphill in the opposite direction before she pulled across the oncoming lane into the Overlook's parking lot. She took the first available spot, only a few spaces from the Dry Falls Visitor Center. She got out, leaving the Outback's air-conditioned interior. It wasn't necessary to lock her car, which held a summer's worth of belongings. A low rock wall a few feet away marked the edge of the canyon's rim. She gazed across the expanse, hands on her hips, duly impressed. The photos she'd seen while doing research didn't do it justice. What stood before her in this rural, out-of-the-way, and relatively unknown area of Washington State, was one of Earth's finest marvels, the largest known waterfall to have graced the planet. However, the 400-foot-high falls that once rushed with a flow 10 times that of all the rivers of the world combined now stood dry. The falls had once been 5 times as wide as Niagara Falls and twice its height. Jess let her gaze roam across the plateau-like top and down nearly vertical walls to the slanted talus slopes. Deep blue plunge pools dotted the valley floor below, the spring-filled lakes reminiscent of what once cascaded over the edges at freeway speeds. Far below, towards the southern part of the canyon, a verdant expanse caught her attention. She made out the long green fairways of a 9-hole golf course and her destination, the campground dotted with lush and vibrant, non-native deciduous shade trees, obviously irrigated. The rest of the drab canyon consisted of parched ground dotted by low-lying shrub-steppe vegetation. The sun seared her back through her shirt. She walked toward plaques that explained the area's history. Most of the information etched on the weather-worn plaques mirrored what she already knew, but she still had trouble imagining water flowing 300 feet above her head. That meant the floodwaters had been 800 feet deep. Jess couldn't wrap her mind around the massive events that had created the area. She walked to the next plaque, newer than the previous plaques, and read with interest. It described how the state park had dedicated the overlook to a ranger and firefighter who had lost her life in a blaze a few years back. Jess read her birth date and realized the ranger had only been 2 years older than she was now. She'd been so young. Tragic, the deep voice came from behind her. She turned to find a uniformed park ranger leaning against a handicapped parking sign watching her. He straightened and stepped over the curb, his 6-foot-plus frame dwarfing her. He was good-looking, dark-haired and hazel-eyed, and everything about his body language told her he knew it. He invaded her space enough that she could smell his musky cologne and read his name badge, B. Rowland. That was quite the fire. It's too bad. She was a good ranger. He rested his hands on his service belt and jutted his chest out. He seemed to be trying to be suave and charming, but he came off as smarmy and overconfident. She wasn't fond of random conversations with strangers, especially when she felt they wanted something. And she classified the beginning of this conversation into that category and took a step back. After expressing her condolences, she managed to weather another 4 or 5 minutes of small talk involving the fire, the brave woman who had died fighting it, and his unabashed surprise that Jess planned to camp alone the entire summer. Upon hearing that tidbit of information, he introduced himself as Barret and suggested she join him and some friends up at a party at Steamboat Rock on Monday. He explained it was casual, a Memorial Day barbecue and some drinks with his friends, but he was certain a pretty girl like her would enjoy herself. With forced politeness, she declined twice and retreated to the safety and serenity of her outback. Cranking the air conditioning to high, she watched him ignore all the other visitors sprinkled along the scenic vista's edge as he ambled along to the visitor center. The cool air did nothing to dispel the unpleasant feeling he gave her. How many young female campers fell for the good-looking man in uniform's act throughout a summer? She wasn't going to be one of them, that was for sure. As Claire snapped her firearm into its holster on her right hip, she mused about how long she'd been doing the same thing. A bit of quick math told her that the upcoming Memorial Day would mark her 9th anniversary of working as a commissioned law enforcement officer and ranger at Sun Lake's Dry Falls State Park. She broke those 9 years into parts. 3 of those years had been educational, 4 of those years full of happiness, and 2 of those years, well, she forced herself not to think about those years. How many times had she buttoned herself into a tan polyester shirt? How many times had she slid into the drab olive green tactical pants? How many months had she lugged around her 9-pound service belt until its weight no longer felt like it hung on her, but rather became a part of her? She had to admit she enjoyed attaching her gold-plated name badge to her uniform every day. It gave her a sense of pride and accomplishment, even after all this time. Her passion for her job might be waning, but her sense of duty wasn't. And I'll leave it there for you. And I apologize you don't get to see them together, but because this was about location, I thought that was the best introduction. And due to time constraints, I didn't want to go too long. So.
Well, that was great. And we have a teaser. We know it's, I think you said, a geologist and a ranger, right? Mm-hmm. So that's right. Great. That's great. And did you say it was the largest waterfall?
They think it was the largest waterfall on the planet at one point in time. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So just a quick question for you. Why did you pick this location? Does it have special meaning for you or your characters?
I wanted to write a story about a female park ranger. And this was a place I frequented or used to when I was younger. And so I knew it well. And, you know, I did have to do a lot of research about the geological aspect because I didn't know any of that. I'm not a geologist, but I did know the area, and I felt like I could write about it with some degree of, I don't know, truthfulness.
Yes.
And then I needed to find a reason for the second character to be there. So that's how the geology aspect came into being. I needed to plant her there for the summer. So.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I bet there was a lot of fun you found out with all the geology work that you had to do.
Yeah, I tried to, put enough in to make it seem real without boring people about rocks.
Oh, that's good. Well, that's great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Next up, we are going to hear from Kimberly Cooper Griffin.
Hi there. Okay. I forgot I wasn't on video, so I was just trying to mute myself. Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm a geology freak, amateur for sure, but that sounds like such a great story there, Alaina.
Yeah, it should be good. Okay, so a little bit about Kimberly. She's a software engineer by day and a romance novelist by night. Wonderful combination. Born in San Diego, she joined the Air Force and traveled the world and eventually settled down in Denver, Colorado, where she lives with her wife, the youngest of her 3 daughters, and a menagerie of dogs and cats. And maybe we'll hear from them.
You probably will. Whiskers was just here trying to get into my lap, so there's a possibility there might be a
Yeah.
I drive by catting here pretty soon.
Yes. When Kimberly isn't working or writing, she enjoys a variety of interests, but at the core of it all, she has an insatiable desire to connect with people and experience life to its fullest, which is great. Every moment is collected and archived into memory and a candidate for being woven into the fabric of the tales she tells. Her novels explore the complexities of building relationships and finding balance when life has a tendency of getting in the way. So Kimberly, if you could kind of introduce us to the book and start reading as you're ready.
Right on. Thanks a lot. I appreciate the intro, Sandra. This book is from my upcoming novel, Tides of Love. It's the beginning of a series called the Oceana series, and it's set in my hometown of Oceanside, California. And I picked it just because I love the area. I've been there a lot. I love the ocean, and I wanted to write about an area that I knew about. Since it's the first book in a series, it'll introduce other characters, but this one's going to be about Jem and Michaela. Jem is the property manager of a mobile home park in Oceana, which is a fictional place inside of a real place called Oceanside, California. And Michaela, who's a woman who's going through a divorce that kind of surprised her. The thing about Oceana is it's a mobile home park that draws people together in ways that help them get past the fears that hold them back from something. And this setting it's an early evening time frame in spring, and Michaela and Jem have just finished a romantic dinner at Michaela's house. They've only recently shared a first kiss that came as a surprise to both of them. But now that the attraction has been unleashed, they can barely think of anything else but more kisses. All right. The energy between them crackled, and Michaela panicked. She wasn't smooth. She was just trying to breathe. How do you feel about a walk on the beach? It was all she had. Sure, said Jem, pushing a strand of hair from Michaela's brow, giving her goosebumps. Why was Michaela shaking? I love it, but I'm a little nervous to go by myself at night. Jem gave her a mischievous grin. Did you just admit to being afraid of the dark? I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of what's in it, like vampires swooping from the night sky. Common things, you know. Great. Now she was nervous and a little creeped out. Fair enough, Jem said, laughing. Michaela playfully punched her shoulder and went to get sweatshirts. Something had shifted between them, something good. A bubbly sort of anticipatory energy filled her body. The walk to the beach was uneventful, and the sense of anticipation followed them, erupting in laughter and looks between them that made heat spread throughout Michaela. Streetlights helped to illuminate the path and settle most of Michaela's unfounded fears, but once the pavement of the street ended, so did the lights, and they found themselves carefully picking through boulders put in place to protect from tidal surges. Concentrating on the path kept her fears at bay, and even her nervousness faded somewhat. A band of smooth ocean rock was easier to walk on, if not a little slippery, and they giggled, holding hands, trying to stay upright. Michaela no longer thought about vampires, just the warm hand in hers and how they gently bumped against each other as they walked. Jumping over a line of fishy-smelling kelp, they found themselves on sand left smooth by the receding tide. Once beyond the street, light still illuminated the beach from the moon. The continuously rolling waves drowned out the sounds of civilization. Michaela slipped out of her sandals and breathed deeply of the cool sea air. They were still holding hands as she picked up her shoes. The cool air creeped through her sweater and linen pants. Are you sure you're warm enough? She asked Jem, who wore shorts and a hoodie. It's chilly, but a good kind of chilly. The hoodie you loaned me is perfect. The tides washed up nearly to their feet, and the white foam almost glowed in the light of the moon. A million air bubbles erupted in the sand as it receded, evidence of tiny sand crabs living at the water's edge. Can I ask you something? Jem asked after a few moments. Anything, Michaela replied, and she meant it. You told me I'm the first woman you've kissed. Yes. That implies you've never dated a woman, I assume. Also, yes. I suppose I should check in about how all this kissing is going for you. Michaela peered at her through her lashes. I'd say it's going very well for me. I suspected as much, but I wanted to make sure. A few steps later, Jem stopped walking. Michaela turned back, and what she saw took the breath from her. The moonlight illuminated Jem's face, distinctly shading the plains and valleys in a study of contrasts. The valleys were dark, the plains appeared as if they were liquid silver, and her hair moved in the wind like it was dancing. She'd never seen a more lovely sight. She stepped closer and caressed Jem's face, pushing her fingers into her hair. She could stand there and stare at her forever. Jem rested her hands on Michaela's hips. I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. It's probably too soon to be talking like this, but I'm kind of into you, if you haven't figured it out by now. If you want time or space to work through things, I'll back off. It'll be hard, but I'll do it until you're ready. You aren't rushing me. I love every minute I'm around you. I especially like the kissing minutes. I don't need time or space. In fact, I want more, a lot more. I always thought I wouldn't have a clue what to do if I dated a woman, but I think I do now. I've been thinking about it since that first kiss. I guess you could say I'm into you too. Very, very into you. Jem opened her mouth as if to speak and closed it. Michaela decided to put her out of her misery and kissed her. In the moments leading up to it, she'd imagined the kiss would be searing hot due to all the pent-up desire and emotion. But when their lips met, a tenderness deeper than anything that she'd ever experienced inspired her to slow down and savor the warmth and gentleness of Jem's mouth. When their bodies came together, breast to breast, thigh against thigh, Michaela ceased to acknowledge the wind, the roaring of the waves, the night wrapped around them. Only her and Jem standing on the edge of something she longed to explore. Her natural instinct to cautiously move forward disappeared, leaving her to fall headlong into the soft warmth of Jem, and she was ready to go wherever passion took them. When Jem's hands slid under her sweater, her back arched. Jem's mouth trailed along her jawline and down the column of her throat. Michaela noted the fluttering fingers caressing her back, the cool air sneaking in under the bottom of her sweater, and Jem's hands moving up to her side, stopping below the swells of her breasts. I could kiss you here all night standing here, Jem said against the skin of her collarbone, eliciting a pleasant tickle. Let's do it then. We'll watch the sunrise. Sounds perfect. Jem's lips vibrated against Michaela's skin. I bet I have a better idea, Michaela said. Why don't we go back to my place where it's more comfortable? Jem's lips stilled. A couch is more comfortable than damp sand. My bed is more comfortable than a couch, Michaela said. Jem's hands grew still before the gentle kisses became insistent and then slowly pulled away. It's incredible how much restraint it's taking me not to run back to the house while pulling you like a kite. Michaela laughed. Let's walk. My bed will still be there.
All right. That was leaving us all a little on the edge, aren't you?
Hope so.
Yes. I have to confess, I think it's Michaela. I am also afraid of the dark, but I'm glad to see she overcame that. So you kind of at the beginning already explained a little bit about the importance of the location itself. So I'll kind of shift the question a little bit. Why the beach? Why at night? And why particular things that you added into, like cold sand, cold breezes? Just kind of wrap us into that a little bit.
Well, there's a real sensory kind of thing that happens when you're in nature and you can feel it around you. And sometimes it just takes over and it sets the mood for certain things. And one of the things I've always thought about when I was a kid, I always thought that my first kiss was going to be at the ocean at sunset. And all the movies,
Yes.
people rolling around in the waves and the water. And it was just always so romantic to me. And so I wanted their relationship to kind of bring that feeling into it, all the sensory aspects of feeling someone near you and being in them and being encapsulated in an area.
Yeah, I gotta say that did come across, because I do remember warm hands and cold sand and cool breezes and whatnot. So that was fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
So up next we have Karis Walsh. There we go. Hello. Thank you.
Hello.
Okay, so a little bit about Karis. She was born and raised in Tacoma, Washington. She enjoys setting her contemporary romances and romantic intrigues in some of her favorite locations in the Pacific Northwest, including Ashland and Cannon Beach, Oregon, and Seattle and Walla Walla, Washington. I just like saying Walla Walla, Washington. I couldn't find it on a map, but I love that name. She hopes her writing can bring some of these beautiful places to life in her readers' minds. Okay, Karis, if you could kind of give us a bit of an intro into the book and the scene you're going to read, and start reading when you're ready.
Sure. It's Love and Lattes, Kitty. And it's about Taryn, who is a wedding planner. She does unique, really personalized weddings. And she's hired by the mayor of Sumner, Washington, a small town in Washington, to plan his wedding. And he wants to have it at a cat cafe that Bonnie owns. So this is Taryn going to the cat cafe, not aware yet that Bonnie does not want to have a wedding there, at all. But Taryn exited off Highway 410 and drove alongside the train tracks and towards Sumner's Main Street. It was a nice town with both quaint and modern characteristics that made it appealing to tourists and locals alike. But even though it was only about 10 minutes from her Puyallup home, Taryn rarely came here. If she turned right when she left her office, she could find a large indoor mall and nearly any chain store or restaurant she desired on Meridian Avenue. Turn left and she had her pick of one-of-a-kind stores and restaurants in downtown Puyallup. Sumner offered the same variety of establishments, just on a smaller scale. Taryn drove past the vast yard of a farm supply store with its piles of fencing supplies and large watering troughs before turning away from the river and entering Sumner's business district. She knew if she continued along the road, she'd find fast food places and some department stores, but the first few blocks of Main Street had a carefully cultivated, old-fashioned feel. Taryn had expected the Cat Cafe to be something tiny, wedged among the antique stores and clothing boutiques. She was surprised to find instead a two-story craftsman-style home on a corner lot, which must have been at the very edge of town at one point. The house was painted a soft peach color with white trim that looked ready for a touch-up. Bright yellow daffodils and small shoots of pale green hosta leaves filled the tiny gardens alongside the entrance. The effect was quite charming, helped in no small part by the woman who was bending down next to a chalkboard placard. She was wearing faded jeans and a short-sleeved sky blue top, and her blonde hair fell in a soft wave just to the line of her chin. Taryn wrenched her attention back to the road, grateful for the quiet morning streets. She had noticed far too many details, letting her gaze linger on the woman for more moments than were safe. She took the next side street and circled around the block before parking a few doors from the cafe and getting out of her SUV. She walked along the sidewalk that was lined with ornamental cherry trees, carefully stepping over the huge cracks where their roots had lifted the concrete. The culprit trees were beautiful, regardless of the damage they were doing. Their gnarled, lichen-covered trunks and velvety little leaves. Most of the pale pink blossoms were strewn on the ground, though. The blooms rarely lasted long around here, since frequent spring rain and wind tore them from the branches almost as soon as the petals were opened. This would be a perfect time of year for the wedding, with guests arriving along this fairy tale path of flower petals. But Taryn had a feeling any season would be just as flattering to this venue. It would be a cozy fur-filled setting in the winter, or redolent with the scent of pumpkin spice lattes in the fall. And summer would bring even more colorful flowers than just the pretty spring daffodils. The woman in front of the cafe stood up as Taryn approached. She had a friendly, though somewhat reserved-looking smile and pale blue eyes. Maybe leaning toward green. Taryn had a feeling they would change color depending on the woman's mood and what she was wearing. She would complement the setting no matter what season Marty and Lex chose for their wedding, adding to the charm of the cafe. The house and area were beautiful, and the woman who seemed to belong there was even more so. As far as Taryn was concerned, the only real drawback to having the wedding here was the cats. She had planned plenty of weddings at zoos and farms, but then the animals were usually separated from the guests. Timmy the turtle was one of the exceptions, but he was unlikely to climb on the counters and shed fur onto the appetizers. Still, it wasn't her wedding. If her clients wanted a house full of cats, they were getting them.
All right, that was great, and I love the detail you've got there, and the cat cafe. I won't say that my own house's little white trim could do some. What would you say? A bit of touch up.
A touch up, yeah.
A bit of touch up, yes. So, how did you pick a cat cafe as your location?
I love writing with animals a lot of times, and I had seen a couple on, watching videos and things, and just thought that would be such a fun life to live, to have just all these millions of cats in there and people coming in to spend time with them, and the rescue aspect of it is something I really like too.
Yes. Yeah, I have never been to a cat cafe. They sound like they would be interesting to go into. And I'm sure there are some around here. I haven't investigated yet. But thank you so much. Next up, we have Charlotte Greene, and I have to apologize to Charlotte. I told everybody right before this the exact order I was going to do it, and of course I messed it up. So, so Charlotte lives and teaches in a small town in Wisconsin. She's a 2-time Goldie winner and a 1-time Lambda Award runner-up. Her most recent 10th novel, well done, there we go. Picture Perfect Christmas is a lesbian romance, which she'll be reading from today. So Charlotte, if you could kind of lead us into the story and whatnot and start reading when you're ready.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charlotte Greene. Today I'm reading again from my 10th novel, a lesbian romance called Picture Perfect Christmas, which came out last month. The main characters, Quinn and Nicole, are photographers and their former rivals and girlfriends that are reunited after almost 20 years and forced to work together over the holidays. In the scene I'm reading from today, they're trying to photograph a herd of elk outside of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. While the snow was only a few inches deep in most places, even here in the lower foothills, it was treacherous and slippery. It wasn't deep enough for snowshoes or skis, but snow of any kind was still wet and slick. And because of the terrain, everything they carried needed to be in a backpack for safety. After loading up, they headed out on the trail, walking toward a lake where Quinn had found elk in the past, both women silent and focused on staying balanced on the trail. Quinn led, and Nicole had to school herself to watch Quinn's feet, not her butt, to avoid distracting herself from the real task of staying upright. Phew, Quinn said, stopping suddenly at the top of her rise. Here we are, that's the lake there. It looked like a picture postcard. Down below them in the gorgeous tree-lined valley, Nicole could see a partially frozen lake. The mountains rose in stark relief of grays and reds, behind the crystalline beauty of the icy water. Everything kissed with fresh, sugar-like snow and frost. Quinn set her backpack down and pulled out some binoculars, lifting her sunglasses before peering into them. She swept around for a few seconds before she paused and held the binoculars out to Nicole. It took a moment for Nicole to find what she'd spotted, but she soon saw a sizable group of elk, all lying huddled underneath a grove of pine trees at the edge of a meadow near a lake. Wow, there's a lot of them. Quinn nodded. There will be others nearby too. They act as kind of lookouts for the rest of the herd, but we won't see them until we get down there. They're good at staying out of sight. Okay, but how do we do this? Nicole asked. I can't imagine we just march right down there. Quinn shook her head. No, you're right. It's more complicated than that. In fact, we have to sort of go around slowly. She pointed far to the right of where the elk were huddled, and stay away as far as possible. They started heading down into the valley, this direction far more dangerous than the path upward had been. Luckily, the hill was short, and soon they were at the bottom and inside a pine forest. The branches insulated the ground here, which was blissfully dry, and the lack of snow made the air much warmer. Let's get our cameras ready here, Quinn suggested, setting her backpack down. Really? Why? You don't want to open a zipper near an animal. I don't know what they think it is, but they definitely recognize it. It's like setting off a bomb. Should be safe to carry the cameras now. Okay, Nicole said, though still uncertain. She'd done so very little nature photography, and all that she had done was happenstance. In a park, for example, or at the beach on vacation. Her inexperience made her very nervous about carrying something as valuable as a camera through the woods. Quinn affixed an incredibly long prime lens to her camera before zipping 2 zoom lenses into her pocket. Nicole was impressed. Quinn was clearly in her element, and Nicole enjoyed seeing her like this, fired up and excited, and evidently very sure of what she was doing. Quinn was sexy anyway, but incredibly so and confident like this. After walking the main trail for another minute or two, Quinn held a finger up to her lips and indicated a small game trail that meandered off the established one. Nicole mimicked Quinn's crouched state, and the two of them wandered through the brush and trees before the woods began to open again. Almost as if they'd planned it, a pile of boulders was clustered at the edge of the trees, near the meadow where they'd seen the elk. Quinn led them to the boulders and they sat down, leaning back on the stone and breathing heavily. Quinn eventually made eye contact with her and signaled silently, okay? Nicole nodded and Quinn moved into a crouch, still hidden by the stones. Nicole kept her head low and then, like Quinn, slowly raised her gaze over the boulders to peer out across the snowy meadow. She heard herself gasp and bit off a sound, almost slapping a hand over her mouth. There, Some 50 yards away stood an enormous bull elk. His antlers had multiple points, and his giant body was heavy with his winter ruff, the fur around his neck and rump so thick and downy he looked like he was wearing a coat. He was staring in their direction as if he detected them, and she heard the quiet, almost silent sound of Quinn already taking photographs. Then, as if losing interest, the bull looked outward toward the lake. Suddenly, he started grazing again, kicking at the frosty snow over the grass to expose the roots. Nicole took a couple of shots of him like this, but the stance was certainly less interesting than when he'd been looking their way. A long series of bugles sounded off to their left, and Nicole turned that way in time to watch two more bull elk emerge from the deeper woods. The big one nearest them seemed to lift his head as if acknowledging the newcomers, and then he trundled and lumbered his way back to the rest of the herd, collapsing near the others as if on a break. The two new elk stationed themselves where the big old bull had been, as if relieving his watch. She and Quinn stayed there, crouched behind the rocks for what seemed like hours. At one point, they were simply watching the elk, and Quinn's mittened hand slipped into hers. They beamed at each other, equally pleased and happy. For Nicole, being here with Quinn in this magical place and seeing those incredible animals up close like this was almost too good to be true. Quinn continued to shoot almost the whole time, utterly absorbed and completely in her element. She seemed entirely focused on what she was doing, and Nicole found it almost too beautiful to watch her. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great, Charlotte. I do love a good winter scene, especially since I've got a little bit of that snow outside right now. But and I'm probably confessing my own ignorance here, but I'm not sure I could tell the difference between an elk and a moose. But I guess your characters could, which is great. So can you just a quick question? If you could tell us why did you pick this particular location? Does it have meaning for you?
Glenwood. Yeah, I was born in Glenwood Springs, and I lived there really only, I think I was not quite 5, but then my family and I would go back there almost every summer, even though I grew up in northern Colorado. So most of my books, or my Colorado books, I should say, always take place in northern Colorado, but I wanted to have one in Glenwood as a kind of special treat for myself. I haven't been back to Colorado in a while because of having a toddler and new job and things. So it was also kind of a homesickness a little bit. And yeah, and it's just so beautiful there.
Now, did it help the homesickness?
I think it did
hurt?
A little bit. It made me, I was talking to my sister still lives in Colorado. I was like, oh, really? Next time we're there, we have to go to Glenwood.
There you go. Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, all the authors could kind of pop back on, and we have some Q&A, which is always fun and exciting. I love Q&As. So I will, let's see, I'm going to start with Kimberly. And how did the setting that you picked influence your characters?
I think that there's a certain sense of people being who they are in California that's kind of a little bit different than any place else I've ever lived. And there's a sense of San Diego people being even more so that way. You walk out and you get a sense of people. In Colorado, I'm also from Colorado, and you walk out and everybody's just friendly. People, you just know that a person's from, Colorado because of how they carry themselves. In California, it's a little bit different because if you're in Hollywood or even in San Diego, you carry yourself in a way that's not really you. You try to present a thing of yourself. And that's pretty across the board for most of the people that I've known in San Diego, including myself when I lived there. So one of the characters, Michaela, she's always been a person that she thought everybody thought she should be all her life. And it's in contrast with the other main character, Jem, who is just who she is. And it's refreshing and different for that area to be like that. And people are attracted to that being very authentic person. And it's also kind of an idea of, being gay. A lot of people, when they're gay, they act differently than they are to a lot of people because they're afraid of being seen as something different than the people around them. So that contrast of those people and the way that they present themselves to the world and how that affects them as a person was the main reason why I took that setting and put those people there. And unless you're from that area, I'm not sure you're going to catch that. And I don't think it's a necessary thing to know to be able to read the story, but it's definitely a thin layer of what's going on in that, setting up the characters in that story.
Oh, that's great. And those of us who listen in now have something a little extra that we're going to get out of the book. So that's great. A little prize for everybody. Alaina, for you, kind of the same question. How does the setting influence your characters?
Well, this setting in particular, I knew because of its uniqueness, it would dictate much of the book in terms of the things they would do. And for one, the setting holds, it has a special place in her heart. It was her dream job. That's where she wanted to be a ranger and, has been for 9 years and holds a lot of memories. And for the other one, for Jess, the geologist, the setting is unique and gives her what she needs for her thesis because, the erosion in that area has opened up all those, 800 feet of layers or whatever it was for her to find things. So, for each, it holds a special meaning. And then I also used it as, for Claire, she can say, I know about this area. Let me show you some things. And that gave them opportunities to be together.
Yeah, that's good. That's actually very interesting and a way to kind of get your characters to know each other through setting. So that's great. Kind of same question for you, Charlotte. How did the settings influence your characters?
So Quinn is the hometown girl. So she grew up there and she stayed there. And then Nicole stayed there until college. And so she has been away in Chicago and, kind of exciting places for 20 years. And so it's a reunion romance, and it's also kind of a coming home romance because actually Nicole, despite, living in Fort Collins and Denver, really wants to move back to Glenwood. And Mrs. Glenwood. That sounds a little bit like me. So a lot of their interactions are very location based, and I have it set at the hot springs, and I have it in the mountains nearby, and I have them go to Aspen a couple of times, and so their romance wouldn't be possible except that they're there in part for Christmas and to take photos for their job.
Yeah, that's good. And we get it's like a little travel brochure along the way, which is great. All of these have been such wonderful settings. So Karis, same for you. How does the setting influence your characters?
Well, both Sumner and Puyallup, where they live, are small towns, kind of small communities surrounded by really beautiful farmland. So you have that sense of belonging to that place and taking care of the people, and they both really seem to have that. Both characters do, that sense of community and giving back to the community. But at the same time, they're just such a short drive from Seattle and Tacoma, so you've got the kind of diversity and more open-mindedness sometimes of larger urban areas, the different types of people that you'll encounter. So they're in a place that's going to be really accepting and supportive of their non-conventional jobs and lifestyles. And so I like that kind of balance in that town.
Yes, that's good. That's great. Okay, we have a couple of questions that were submitted. So I'll start with some of this you've covered a little bit, but when choosing your setting, I think a lot of us have said it's based on some place but if it's someplace new, how did you do your research, or even the places that what kind of research did you have to do, even if it was a place you lived in now or lived in before? We'll start with Alaina this time.
So in terms of the setting for this book, like I said, I've camped there many times, so I knew it to some extent, but I do a ton of research. I always have a browser tab open just, to Google random things, whether it's how do I spell the name of this bike, or just little things, even not even the, whole large, what was the geological process that created this area. So, and that one I've been there, but I had to do a lot of research. And then, in my other books, like the next one is set in New York City, which I've visited, but I haven't lived. So, that took a lot of research, but the smaller setting is in a restaurant kitchen, which I do have a lot of experience with. But at the same time, I still research a lot of things just to make sure, I'm up on what they're doing in terms of technology with cooking. And, it's been a few years since I've worked in a kitchen. So yeah, I do a little bit of both, I guess.
That's great. Great. Okay, Karis, same question for you. Balance of what you know versus what you've researched, and kind of tell us a little bit about that.
I think the research, and you always are ready to Google something. I agree with that. I do like to go visit the places, even though usually the places I write about, I've been to quite a few times. But when you go and drive around or walk around with the idea that you're writing this book and these characters are going to be there, you notice different details and small things that pop out that you can add. So I like to do that. A little more challenging over the past few years sometimes to be able to go to the places. But I also try to be a little open to, I want it to feel accurate and to be honest about the place that it is, but I let there be some, it's a little bit fictionalized. And so if I create stores or restaurants or little areas in there that are kind of made up and just for the story, I kind of allow that to happen too, while still being true to the place that it is.
Yeah, that's good. And yeah, the past few years have been difficult for visiting, but I must confess, Google Street View has helped me a few times. Kimberly, same for you. Question about what you know versus what you're researching in your locations.
Well, it's funny that you say that. When you do know someplace, sometimes you have to go in and validate some of the things you think you know about things. In my books, I like to keep things as realistic as I possibly can, but I also invent a lot of new things too. So I literally went into the whole geological formation of the area of the beaches that the people were living on and living, doing things at. And so understanding the tides and the weather patterns, I knew that they happened. And I know that I talked about the Santa Ana winds, and I knew that they were freaking hot and you were uncomfortable if you didn't have air conditioning, but where they came from and how El Nino and La Nina affect the California coastal area, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of research into that, but I did a lot more research on the coastal wildlife, because seahorses play a big part in this book too. And I love them and I know a lot about them, but I didn't know enough. And so I had to do a lot of research about that. And then there's some surfing and some of the missions in the area. So I did a lot of research on a lot of things from a place that I'm from, and it was really enlightening, I think.
Wow, that's good. Another little special treat for everybody who was watching this. We now know there are seahorses there as well. So that's great. So Charlotte, the same kind of question, what you already know about a setting versus what you do for research.
Yeah, definitely. I cheat a little bit in the sense that I'll use things that I know are still there and, sort of main tourist attractions with this one, like Doc Holliday's grave and, hot springs, like those aren't going to move. Yeah, and then I do a little bit in this book and in the books that I have that are set in Loveland, my hometown, of like, it's there, but I replace it with my own version, so my favorite brewery is replaced with like just a version that makes sense for the plot. And I try and include, actual restaurants and hotels and things that I'll do there. But it always takes a little bit of like, oh, maybe that's closed now. I guess I should check. Or, oh, is that just a breakfast place? Or, so I feel like it's a little bit of a combination of using what I know, cheating a little bit, and making things up.
Yeah, Yeah, well, that's kind of the fun we have as authors, isn't it? Just to kind of
Mhm.
create and go off on tangents when they feel like fun. Okay, so another question. Oh, I knew we'd have a visitor.
Down the door.
Okay, so the next question that was submitted, so happy to see books set in rural outdoors and a park ranger too. Do you make these settings like a character? And if so, what techniques do you use to do so? So this is settings as character. That's a deep one. So Karis, we'll start with you.
Here I am. Sometimes they do feel like characters. They can influence plot. To go back to one of my last books, Sit, Stay, Love, was set in Yakima, which is a small town. But in that case, it's kind of isolated from the more populated area of Washington by the mountains. So you have a sense of kind of being cut off and very outdoorsy and casual, and very unlike the more urban areas of Washington. And so that almost added some conflict to the story when my character came from more of a city area and thought that's what she was going to, and then ends up in this kind of isolated place. So in that way, I don't know if it was so much of a character as it was just adding to the conflict of the story and kind of helping progress the plot a little by that. But the setting does influence that way, just like adding a new character would. It can change the tone and the dynamics between the two characters and the conflicts that are going on with the characters themselves.
Yeah, I like that idea of setting as conflict. As writers, we're always investigating these things, and making setting as part of that really does enrich the story. So Charlotte, same question for you. How is your setting like a character in your stories?
Yeah, I really think when you're writing fiction, you get to kind of travel, right? And so I'm always thinking about in a place like Glenwood with this book, when you're there, you just can't help but think about just how stunning everything is. And it's a 19th century cowboy town, was a tuberculosis sanatorium originally, right? And so it's got this really cool history there, and you just kind of feel it. And it's got, one of Molly Brown's houses, and it's just really neat. And so, yeah, I want to try and make it so that if no one's been there, they could picture it as much as possible. And yeah, and then the characters having the hometown connection to this, small 20,000 person city. Also, I think, influences the way that they've lived, and then the way that they're reacting to the situations that they're.
Yeah, it's very much as you're describing it. I can see that where you are, where the characters are. Definitely, it's like another character interacting with them, changing tempo and whatnot. So that's fantastic. Alaina, same question for you.
Yeah. When I started writing, I don't think I, set out and said, okay, the setting is going to be a character. But, for this one, it was. And even, I kind of alluded to it in my prior answer, but I think I even used the weather, to play with that a little bit and to sort of reflect their emotions. Because, it does have sort of unusual weather in the area and the winds that come through the canyon. But, I think it's probably more specific to this book. Like my next book, takes place in a restaurant, and most of the scenes are interior. And I don't know that the setting will have as much of an impact as this one did, but we'll see.
Yes. All right. Let's see. Kimberly. Now I've lost track. I don't think I asked you this question yet.
No, you haven't.
Okay, good.
I like to think of settings as characters in general. just for the fact that you do go through an entire developmental process of a setting and the area that you're in, and depending on what the book's about, it could be a vital part of it or a side character kind of thing. And in Tides of Love and in the other 2 books that are in the series, I'm currently writing the 3rd one right now, and the 2nd one's in editing. But this first one sets up a lot of the personalities there, and there's, since it is a series, there are 2 sets or 3 sets of couples so far in the 3 books, and then some side characters. And the setting was it had to be diverse and big enough to hold them all, but also small enough so that it felt familiar and comfortable or uncomfortable in certain areas. So the setting itself for each character reflected them in certain ways, and affected the way that they could move inside the book. And so, for instance, in the book, there's a side character of Jem's father who is struggling with some memory loss issues, and has been kind of ill. And the trailer, or the mobile home park, is where he set it up to create this place. And so Oceana is this special place, and his intent has been infused into it. And there's a little bit of special kind of magic there that brings people together for things that they really need. And in that, because he's having problems with his brain, and they think that he's having early Alzheimer's, that he's kind of trapped in there. He's trapped in his own brain or his own mind and his memories and things like that. So things about the setting kind of reflect him inside the trailer park. And then the way that Jem, who is taking this park over from her father, how it feels like to her. And it's kind of like a prison to her with the walls and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of little elements of that. And the ocean is a big thing for Michaela. She's a swimmer. She goes out to the ocean and swims. Ah.
Oh, we all have to pause for the oh now.
But just being in the ocean, the way that it works for other people, and even the weather reflects their feelings and their thoughts and things like that. So it is a character, but it's also influencing a lot of things too. And hopefully that comes out in the storytelling.
That's great. That's great. We have maybe a couple more minutes, so I'm going to do like a quick round for each of you. Is there a location you're just dying to write about in the future? And we're going to start with Charlotte.
Sorry, Allie, burst in. I do study abroad with my students sometimes in London, and I've always wanted to set a book there. So
Oh, London, yes.
that's gonna be my next one.
Cool. Kimberly, location you're dying to write about.
I would love to write about Ireland and Scotland, that area.
Oh, yeah.
Mostly because I just want to travel there, but
There you go. Research.
Yeah, the history, yeah.
Karis, location you're dying to write about.
I've done a few books on the Oregon and Washington coast, and I'd definitely like to revisit one of those areas or find a new one on the coast. So like
Cool.
Kimberly was saying, I love ocean settings, and I just love being at the ocean personally. So yeah, I'd like to do that again.
Great. And Alaina, where would you love to do research and travel for your next story?
Anywhere that there's an ocean, or a beach, I would love. But I'd like to write one about San Francisco too, just because it has a special place in my heart.
Oh, lovely, lovely. So we've got world tour coming up pretty soon. Yeah, when everybody gets their next story out. So again, I want to thank all the authors. You've read some fabulous stuff from some great locations. I really felt like I visited some of these places. For those watching, I hope you found a story here, or a few stories that you like. You can see in the chat, there's links to each of them. And I believe there's a special sale on this whole weekend. Hopefully I didn't say that wrong, but somebody will correct me. So if you see something or heard something you like, please go pop over and buy the book. And that's it. There'll be another session starting in about 5 minutes, so everybody can take a break and join what comes next. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Bold Strokes Bookathon today.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.